Well, thank everyone for coming. It is always wonderful to be here and share the Dharma with everyone. And it's a beautiful, somewhat hot day. And I just did the world's quickest PowerPoint compilation with the help of the Fasher here. So I'm all set to go. So first I want to read the liturgy in speaking about the sutra, which is the unsurpassed and profound and sublime Dharma is difficult to encounter, even in a billion eons. Today we receive, hear, and uphold it, vowing to fathom the true meaning of the Tathagata. Okay, so the last time I spoke here was in March, which seems ages ago to me. And I had, at that time, the time before that, I had finished my entire series of talks about the Lotus Sutra. I spoke about the Lotus Sutra, all 28 chapters. I spoke about the preliminary sutra, which is called the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. And I spoke about the last sutra, the one that comes after the Lotus, which is considered part of it, which is the Sutra of the Contemplation of Samantabhadra's Practices, also known as Universal Sage. So what I did at that time was to stand back from all the sutras. Are we okay? Okay. And really look at what it is to read a sutra and to practice what a sutra contains or points to. Theoretically, practice and study should complement one another, but it seems that one can get too caught up in study and live in one's head, engaged only intellectually, or one can practice intensively in a very self-centered way and get caught up in the physical and mental pleasures, if that's what they be, of practice. So at that last time, I talked about some controversy among Ming Dynasty masters, which is still a controversy today in a sense of like how much of sutra and textual kinds of components should be part of one's practice. You know, when are you living too much in your head, as I said before. And I also quoted Bodhidharma's fourfold axiom, which is that the awakening of wisdom and compassion is number one, a transmission outside of doctrine, two, not dependent on words or language, nor concepts, labels, or categories, three, which points directly to the mind, by four, seeing one's nature in order to realize Buddhahood. And as I said last time, that's really a heads up not to become too attached. It doesn't really mean don't read sutras, don't talk to teachers. It's, but it is pointing to an essential truth about ultimate reality. I know that's quite a phrase, but that's what we're going to talk about today, which really can't be expressed in any conceptual way. So now this is going to be my last talk for a while on the Lotus Sutra. This is number 28, I think. So what I want to do now is to hone in on practice in even a more intimate way. So I'd like to share some of my recent observations of the text as I try to understand the principle that pervades the sutra. And I find reading the text over and over again, coming back, all of a sudden you start picking up things that you never saw before. So, and what I hope is that this kind of exploration will encourage others to read the sutra, because it is a massive work, exceedingly profound, and one could easily become discouraged or lost in the study of it. And the other thing, which I guess I worry about even more, is that after you've read it, it becomes like a novel. It's like just a bunch of concepts that you've read, and it sort of lies on your shelf, and that's about the end of it. So what I see in the Lotus Sutra is that it's really like all sutras. It's moment-to-moment living reality that points to our true nature and our deepest purposes. So I'm going to give a structure of my talk, and as is my wont, it's pretty replete with a lot of different things. I'm pulling in a lot of images and different texts, all in service of looking deep into the mind, how we encounter the world around us. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is just some real life examples of what we all encounter, and shows the way that our self nature is always insinuating itself into all of our activities. And this is a very down-to-earth example that I'll give, and I think it contrasts with the phantasmagoric, extraordinary images and stories in the Lotus Sutra, where stupas are rising in the air and all sorts of miraculous feats are being performed, and time and space disappear, if you will. And that's very important in what it shows and how it is a helpful approach. But first, I want to talk about, just what it's like to walk on the street. And the second, I'm going to explore some key passages in the Lotus. And I hope this will hone in to the essential teaching. This is what Dao Sheng, the first commentator in China on the Lotus Sutra, continually pointed to, Li, which means in Chinese principle, the part of the world, the life that can't be grasped, can't be apprehended by the senses, but also can't not be apprehended by the senses. It's all around us. It's just not so apparent because we're lost in our own world, like the very famous story of the children in the burning house in the Lotus Sutra, who are so involved in their toys, they don't realize the danger that they're in. And of course, the danger, according to the sutras, is that we are prisoners of our senses. And once again, there's so many stories in the Lotus Sutra I'd like to go over, and I'll reference them a little bit from here sometime, but I'm really trying to hone in on the essential teachings now. So, and the third thing, the last part of the talk, which will probably be the longest, maybe, is that I'm going to show some visual materials, some Western paintings and some tantric paintings, some from the Tibetan tradition. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how the two conditions connect. And so I have to make two disclaimers right now. First of all, I have no official background in art history, right? So everything I'm talking about is about me as an observer in a museum like anyone else. Second of all, I am not a Vajrayana practitioner at all. So what I'm going to speak about is what I've learned from one of my teachers and from my work at the Rubin Museum. So let me give an example of the kind of thing that we might encounter, right? Things that have to do with our personal interaction in the world on an everyday basis. So let's say you enter a meeting or a party where you don't know anyone. Of course, no one recognizes you, and people are already engaged in conversations. According to your personality or your karmic proclivities, you might start to think, no one is coming over to me. I guess I'm pretty uninteresting. These people probably think I'm an idiot. I don't want to open my mouth. I'd better leave. Now, you might think this is a rather extreme example of poor self-image, no confidence and inferiority, and I think it is. But there's some truth in the way that people feel in situations, maybe more or less intense than this. The thing to see in looking through a situation like this, it's also an example of arrogance, because here the person is really so self-centered and arrogant and prideful, they've made themselves the center of the universe. And without any justification whatsoever, they've determined what everyone else around them is thinking, right? I mean, they don't know. They're just in a room looking at people and letting their minds fabricate. And, you know, the word we use is prapanka, proliferate, one thought after another. So this is really an extreme example of longing and desire, because a person in a situation like that might be thinking subconsciously or consciously, if I only had such and such position, if I was rich or powerful, if I had a number of PhDs, then people would pay respect to me. They would like me. So now here's a counter example. Okay. You enter a meeting or a party and you look around at everyone and you think, these people are all losers. Nobody here is as smart as I am. I don't want to waste my time standing around talking to a bunch of idiots. That's quite an arrogant attitude, right? On the other hand, there's quite a lot of fabrication here also, a lot of insecurity. No compassion for the person around them, just aversion to mind-created images and attitudes. And of course, just in these two examples, what I'm introducing is the three poisons: greed, hatred, and ignorance. These are the things that are continually obstructing us. And they're also contained in, there are many ways of approaching these in the Buddhist teaching, as they're also called they're part of the 5 obstacles or 5 obstructions, which are greed, hatred, and ignorance, and conceit and envy. They're all about not accepting the moment as it is, wishing things were different. And so these are products of the mind that is caught in a web of illusion and self-fabrication. So the Lotus Sutra, like all sutras, shows the error and harm of these obstacles, harm to ourselves, harms to other people. And it does much more than that, laying the groundwork, not only for overcoming these difficulties, but helping all other beings to overcome them. And ultimately, seeing our own Buddha nature and ultimately becoming Buddhas ourselves. A little aside, you know, from a scholarly point of view, some may know that the actual word Fo Xing, Buddha nature, doesn't exist in the Lotus Sutra. But for anyone who is a practitioner, it's obvious that the sutra is nothing other than about Buddha nature. So I want to give a Western example now about Narcissus. So I'm actually just, let's see if I show, oh wait, I've got to go to Zoom. Just bear with me, this is, yeah, I want to share this. Oh, there we go. Zoom and share. Okay, and okay. Okay, that come up? Okay, so that is a picture by Caravaggio, 16th century Italian painter, on Narcissus. So this is a myth I think that many people are aware of, and it's about a mythical youth by the name of Narcissus, who was the son of a river god and a water nymph. And okay, what happened is when he grew to maturity, another forest nymph fell in love with him and he spurned her attention. So then Nemesis, who is the god of revenge, according to the Greeks, and very interestingly enough, is kind of a manifestation of Aphrodite, the goddess of wisdom. And this is something you find in Tibetan tantric teachings, that there is a correlation between wisdom and anger, because anger is very observant of what's happening around it. But so what happened is Nemesis wanted to get revenge on Narcissus. So when Narcissus was hunting, the goddess, Nemesis, god or goddess, lured him to a pool, and he looked down and he saw his reflection. And he fell so in love with his reflection that he tried to embrace it, and he fell in the water and he drowned. There are many variations of this story, but this is the one I'm using right now. So most people, if you were to ask somebody, what is narcissism? They would say it's self-love. But what I want to point out is that in this particular case, it's not really self-love, because when Narcissus looked at the reflection, he didn't know that it wasn't him. He thought it was some beautiful youth for whom he had enormous desire. So he was looking at an illusion of self, not the self itself, right? And so in Chan practice, we talk about sometimes the authentic self, our true nature. And what he was being swayed by and ultimately doomed by was his attachment to image, to appearances. Now, if I put a Chan spin on this story, I could say that what Narcissus experienced was the great death, because he dissolved his sense of self in drowning. And actually, I neglected to add that Tiresias, a sage, when Narcissus was born, made a prophecy that Narcissus would have a very long life as long as he didn't discover himself. So there's a kind of a two-edged sword in this myth. And I just want to point out the pervasiveness of this attachment to self. It's central to our teachings, but it's very hard to see, right? Because when we walk around the world, we're seeing, as Guoxing Fasher, one of Master Sheng Yen's Dharma heirs, says, we're always seeing ourself. And what that means, we're not thinking that a wall or a building is ourself. We're seeing it according to our personality, according to our proclivities. And what we see seems very real to us. Okay, so now I'm going back. So that's the story of Narcissus. And now I'd like to return to the Lotus Sutra and to show the essential teaching that cuts through illusion. And I'm going to talk about two or three passages from the sutra, which are, in a sense, atypical, because these passages are not stories, and they're not about really amazing images or phenomenon that are kind of beyond our understanding. Not that these passages are easy to understand, quite the contrary, they're very, very deep, but it connects the Lotus Sutra to a lot of other sutras, like the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra, which are really pointing to our essential nature in very specific language. So I was amazed in looking back at the first chapter at the Lotus Sutra. Now, when I first started studying it, I think my first real exposure to it was almost 5 years ago, and I took a seminar at Columbia, which really wasn't about Buddha Dharma. It was really the Lotus Sutra as a kind of cultural phenomenon, a cultural and religious with a capital R phenomenon. And I remember the professor trying to make a flow chart of the first chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And the flow chart looked like a bowl of spaghetti. It's just continually curling within itself. And there are some spectacular events which are narrated and then they're remembered. And I couldn't possibly go into all the details here about it. But what I want to emphasize is that there seems to be in this chapter really just one teaching that is a propositional, right? And let me explain what I mean by that. So in the first chapter, there are some very extraordinary events. First of all, the appearance of a Buddha. is an extraordinary event with the entire assembly of bodhisattvas and arahats and Garudas and Kimnaras and all of these other creatures, human and inhuman. And the Buddha teaches a sutra called the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. And I'm not going to talk about that exactly, but the passage that I'm going to show is actually pretty much the essence of what innumerable meanings mean. And once the Buddha does this, all of the attendants rejoice, they dance around him. Flowers fall from the heavens, the earth quakes in 6 different ways, and then the Buddha emits a ray of light from his urna, right, the tuft of between his 2 eyes, and he illuminates the entire universe. It's called 18,000 realms, but it really means the universe. And all of these great bodhisattvas and mahasattvas and arhats and everything don't really understand what is happening. And that's another thing that happens in this first chapter, is this inquiry of what does this all mean? And interestingly enough, we don't really find out what this all means. This is one of the things the Lotus Sutra is famous for. Manjushri explains that this emission of light is a way of announcing the Buddha's great teaching of the one vehicle. But just what the light is, how it works. I mean, the light illuminates the entire universe. All the 6 realms can be seen. All of people's karmic ups and downs are apparent in this light. And other things that happen in the chapter, of course, is Maitreya is announced to be the new Buddha, and by implication, the present Buddha, Shakyamuni, is going to go into nirvana. He's going to leave the world, go into extinction. And of course, we're not really clear what that means. But so what I want to, let me go bring this particular passage up and see if I get it right this time. Zoom meeting and share screen. Screen 2. And now I have to scroll down. Yeah, oh, it is sharing. So yeah, but okay. All right, wait a second. This, I've got to share the right screen. Okay. Yeah, the picture. So it's this, right? So, okay. How do I, 1 second.
So you're showing the
Next one, yeah. Here we go. All right. I can guarantee that the Buddha did not have these kind of problems when he was giving his discourses. So this is one of the things that a sun and moonlight Buddha, who's the past Buddha in the first chapter, pronounces that he has proclaimed this teaching. And I want to look at it somewhat closely and see what we might make of it. Now, it's only 5 characters, and I have 6 different translations of it because nobody is really sure how to translate it in a certain way. But what I want to emphasize is what it says is each character, it's all, now the fa, that second character, can either be phenomenon, dharmas, or it can be the truth. In this case, I think it's probably the dharmas, phenomenon. And then actuality, as they really are. And then the next character is appearance or form or sign or characteristic. And the last one means meaning or teaching or doctrine. So what the Buddha is saying in this case is that what his teaching is all about is to help us sentient beings see things as they really are, so that we do not rely on our fabrications, on our attachments. So that's so the first part is that with the appearance, right, is that's the way things are. The last character, E, this for meaning or doctrine, is really about the teachings itself. And this phrase, to my mind, combines both wisdom and compassion, the absolute and the relative, because wisdom, clarity, is really of no use if you can't share it, if you can't use it to help other sentient beings. And that ability to use it is compassion. And I'm introducing this to show people who want to read the sutra further that you can look for this in every chapter of the sutra. It's kind of a through-going theme. And so that's the first one I want to emphasize. And then now, the next chapter in the Lotus Sutra is about skillful means. And these two chapters, and I spoke about them, it must be 3 years ago, so I had to remember all of this. But these two chapters are inseparable, right? Because the first one is about wisdom. It's about the wisdom of the way things are. Actually, I think that the entire Lotus Sutra is contained in that emission of light from the Buddha's urna. But we ordinary sentient beings can't understand that. So in the second chapter, the Buddha is really dealing with this issue of how can he impart his teachings. And I think many people know this story, that he was not exactly sure that he could do it because teachings are so subtle and profound. And Indra or Brahma came down and convinced him to teach. And when he decided to teach, now this is now in the Lotus Sutra, because in the Pali Canon, what he realized is that there were sentient beings who did not have that much dust in their eyes. That is, they could see reality to some extent. They were still beset by vexations and difficulties, but there was really hope for them. But here in the Lotus Sutra, the ante is upped, if you will, because now the Buddha is saying not just that people can awaken, he's saying that people can actually become Buddhas, just like him. This is what his mission is, to make and help people become just like he is, a Buddha. And so that means imparting all of his wisdom, which he has withheld. This is what the Lotus Sutra says. But he realizes he can't do that. He can't give his wisdom, his insight to sentient beings who are not ready for it. So he has to use skillful means. He has to use parables and metaphors and images and all sorts of things that will start to let people turn the light around, start to look at themselves, right? So in the second chapter, he talks about the 5 decays. The deterioration of the kalpa is the ending of the world, if you will. And we have global warming. We have all sorts of things going on. These things are very relatable to, fortunately or unfortunately. The festering of delusions, right? So that's people becoming hardened in their views. Politicization, polarization, which is something we can see around us. And remember, this is written or spoken 2,000 years ago, give or take, some centuries. The degeneration of living beings, people's health, and their knowledge, and a variety of things starting to decay. Degeneration of views, people holding on to false views, wrong views of being very, very selfish, being self-contained, angry, all of really feeding into these 3 poisons and 5 obstructions that I just mentioned, and diminishing lifespans. Actually, in America, the lifespan has been just going down a little bit. I'm really not trying to create panic, but I'm just saying the things that we can relate to. Anyway, so he's really aware of these kind of things. But once again, in the spirit of what I just said before, of this teaching of absolute pure reality, unaffected by our own prejudices, he talks about the 10 suchnesses. I hope you can all see these. Now, what's so interesting about these 10 suchnesses is they align very well with what I just showed before, the teaching of ultimate reality. Also, when I first started studying the Lotus Sutra and I looked at these 10 suchnesses, I took one look at them and I turned the page because they made no sense to me. But I think now I'm getting a sharper picture, because what this is, first of all, the Buddha is saying, and this is part of the teaching of skillful means, expedient means, that only a Buddha together with a Buddha can fathom the ultimate reality of things. Right? That's what it says. And the Buddha also says in this chapter that even if there were 100,000 Sariputras, who is the greatest of the Theravadan practitioners, known for his wisdom, even if they were all placed together, the wisdom would just be a drop in the ocean of the Buddha's wisdom. But so the Buddha is showing these 10 suchnesses to clue us in on a way of entering into a way of noticing things, a way of deepening our understanding. Also, just a little scholarly note, evidently this passage about 10 suchnesses doesn't exist in the Sanskrit version of the Lotus Sutra. It's only found in the Chinese, but I'm not going to quibble with it. I take it as part and parcel of the sutra. So let me break down what these 10 suchnesses are and see how they can be helpful. What they are, they're noticing various truths, if you will, things that are such, that are not compounded. They're not produced by other things that are what they are, at least sometimes on a provisional basis and sometimes on a more absolute basis. But in a beginning kind of approach to this, we can see that things have form, meaning appearance, right? Things look like what they look like, and they have a nature. They have a kind of degree of longevity, a kind of substantialness to what they can interact with or not interact with, kinds of tendencies. That's what the nature is. They have an embodiment. So a cow is embodied in a cow. Things are contained in the way that they are contained. And then they have potential, right? All of this, the nature and all the things that are kind of inside of us can be manifested in a variety of ways. And then we do things, we take actions. So this is going from kind of the surface level, the appearance, to a deeper level in terms of how we interact karmically. Then, once we have this tableau, if you will, of how we are physically and mentally in the world, then impermanence comes in, because our actions have consequences. And then there are causes. When we do something, we're creating a cause. And the cause is couched or influenced by other conditions, right? The classic view is that you have a seed of a plant, but it won't grow into a flower or a plant unless it has soil, it has air, it has water, the proper temperature, it's not disturbed. A number of things have to be around it for it to reach fruition. When all of those things happen, there are results. Right? This seems quite logical. It's different from the normal Western understanding of cause and effect because it's much broader. It's noticing that we don't really know the causes and conditions of everything, especially when we're ordinary sentient beings. And then there is the retribution of what our actions are. And that has to do with our karma. So if you, I might have given this example last time, but if you're walking through a orange grove in Florida and you see this beautiful white frost on the orange plants, it might be something that you would find very pleasing. But if you're a farmer and those orange trees belong to you and you're in danger of losing your crop, then it's a very unpleasant situation. So all of this, I hope, is pretty clear and logical. When we, in the number 10 is when we reach the level of the absolute. So it's the, and I guess I put it in bold, it's the equality of all the above. It's kind of everything, everywhere, all at once. It's this, and this points to the ultimate suchness of everything and the emptiness of everything. But those first 9 are really about the world of form, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. They have a certain reality to it, and they have a certain degree of change and unreality. And as Master Sheng Yen always said, things are empty and they exist simultaneously. And this is contained in the Heart Sutra when we talk about form is not other than emptiness, emptiness not other than form. Form is precisely emptiness, emptiness is precisely form. Many of us have been reciting this for years and years. And it's not like we totally understand it, I would say. But it's important teaching that it starts to penetrate into our minds. But if we look a little closer, so in Master Sheng Yen's book, There Is No Suffering, when he talks about those two things, he points out that there's a difference between form is not other than emptiness, right? And form, sensation, perception, and volition. Form is not other than emptiness. The difference between that and emptiness is not other than all of the above. The idea is that if you just see things as empty, you can be caught in this state of seeing things as absolute. You can develop this kind of arrogance, right? But if you see that form, that emptiness is really wondrous existence and can be used to help other people, can intervene in people's and your own karma, then it is really quite a miraculous thing. So these 10 suchnesses, once again, they're just, it's a list of 10 things. We're really dealing on the conceptual level, but what they point to is quite profound. And this is what I want to bring out in my talk here. So, okay. Now we're ready to, I'm just looking at the time. Okay, I'm doing fine. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And before I get into this next, I'm going to stop the share for a moment and move to my talk. And let's see. So I want to talk about what I'm going to do now in showing a variety of images and pictures. And I'd like to hopefully make it clear what I'm trying to do. I'm really pointing out, I'm going to be using Western art and a tanka and a Tibetan statue, among other things. And what we're really looking at in our practice, in many ways, there are many things we're looking at, but we're really looking at how we do perception. How does our mind react to things? How are we aware of what we think we're aware of, right? We're conscious of things. We think we have really understood things, but we don't necessarily know that we're holding on things. And what we do is we turn objects, all the things that come into our senses, we turn them into symbols, and symbols that are manufactured, of our own making. And it behooves us really to try to rise above that, to look at, not to push it away. It has to be very clear. We're not trying to live in an absolute world, but we're trying to live in the world as it is, to our fullest capacity. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when I get into the pictures. But I want to talk about this connection between Chan and Tantra. And there actually are some sutras and tantras in Tibetan history. They're not very, well, they haven't been that widely known, but there really is a connection. And I want to just talk about that a little bit so you see where I'm coming from. Because in Chan, we don't usually use visualizations. We don't normally try to use our attachments quite the way that Tibetans do in their practice. So I want to talk about a passage from a 6th century Indian teacher named Bhavaveka, who wrote a work which is translated as The Blaze of Reasoning, the Tarka Javala. And it's a dialogue between the Buddha and Kashyapa, one of his great disciples. And I'm going to go over this in its entirety. It's just 2 paragraphs, but I think it's very, very informative. So the Buddha tells Kashyapa that some beings are tormented by unfounded suspicion that they have taken poison. And this really fits into the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, where the metaphor is of a doctor who is left and his children have taken some poison among his medicines, and they are diluted. And when he comes back, because of the different conditions they're in, and this is a very important part of the Lotus Sutra's teachings, that we're all in different states along our path, and we all have different needs and different desires. So the Buddha is able to convince some people, some of his children, that they need to take the proper medicine to be restored to their senses. But some of the children just won't be convinced. So he leaves and pretends to be dead. And that causes an aspiration in the children, because they're grieving, to arise and to get out of their state. And they take the medicine, of course, is the Dharma itself. So I just want to make a connection to this, the word of poison. It's really the greed, hatred, and ignorance. So the Buddha then continues. So a skilled person pretends to remove poison that was never there, right? It was in their minds. The things that we create, the fabrications, they're poisons that are not really there, but we believe in them. But would those beings have lived if the doctor had not pretended to move the poison? Kashyapa said, no, it was the unreal moving the unreal. So this is getting into the way that Tantra and Chan, I'm going to talk about Sutra of Complete Enlightenment in a second, but the unreal removing the unreal. So the Buddha says, I teach the doctrine in an unreal manner to the childish. Kashyapa, how could you not speak the truth? And so the Buddha said to Kashyapa, are you liberated by truth or untruth? Right? This is a big pause here, right? What is the answer? And Kashyapa says, I am liberated by untruth, not by truth. Bhagavan, desire, hatred, and obscuration are said to be untrue, right? They're fabrications, right? If desire were true, Bhagavan, one could not extricate oneself from desire through meditation on what is foul and unpleasant and horrible, right? Because you can't get rid of something that doesn't exist, but you can get rid of your illusions that they exist. So if hatred were real, Bhagavan, one could not extricate oneself from hatred through meditation on love. If obscuration, that's ignorance, delusion, were real, Bhagavan, one could not extricate oneself from obscuration through meditation on dependent origination. In other words, the teachings that let us see through the things that are blocking us, like the 10 substances I just spoke, those would be of no use if illusion was really real. So Bhagavan, it is because desire, hatred, and ignorance are unreal that one can separate oneself from them by meditation on the foul, the horrible, the terrible, love and dependent origination. Bhagavan, since all afflictions are unreal, they are completely abandoned by realization that is unreal. Bhagavan, because both the afflictions and that by which they are abandoned are unreal and untrue, unreal knowledge removes one from unreal afflictions. It's quite a mouthful, but we're speaking at a very deep level here. So comparing himself to a physician, the Buddha says, in the same way, Kashyapa, do I teach the doctrine in an unreal manner to childish common beings who are beset by afflictions. Kashyapa recognizes that his defilements are not true, not substantially existence in the sense of possessing an intrinsic nature, that they are susceptible to meditation on the foul, on love, and on dependent origination. But he goes on to imply that this susceptibility is not because the unreal is overcome by the real. Bhagavan, because both the afflictions and that by which they are abandoned are unreal and untrue, unreal knowledge removes one from unreal afflictions. The Tibetan word for knowledge implies that the knowledge that things are not real, and that knowledge itself, both the unreal and the real, are absent of any real intrinsic nature. And in the Lankavatara Sutra, it talks about dharmas and non-dharmas, really about what seems to be real and what seems to be not real. And in the Lankavatara, it says they're all the same, right? It's very counterintuitive to how we view the world, right? So one more connection. So this is kind of my modus operandus, my justification for using the pictures that I'm going to use, because they're just images. Also, so in the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, in the chapter of the Bodhisattva of Complete Enlightenment, there are three meditative stages that are introduced. So there is samatha, that's calming the mind, and there is dhyana, which is really vipassana, which is looking into the mind. Then there is another one, which is somewhat unique to this sutra, which is samapati. And that is combining the quiet of the mind and the insight of the mind. And in this particular passage, the method of samapati is using the unreal, the illusion, it's using illusion to fight illusion. So I'm now going to go and fight an illusory battle with these pictures, okay? So now I've got to regroup and, I've got to pick the right screen again. And it's this? Screen 2, okay. 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 All right. So everyone, anyone who thinks that this is the Buddha does not get an A. I just want you to know, just in case you're now, any of us who've grown up in America, and I bet many Chinese would recognize this as a portrait of George Washington. Now, the question is, why did I pick this? So I picked this because this is a two-dimensional image, right? It's form, lines, and whatever. But we bring to this picture, almost everybody, a certain understanding even before we saw it. So this has a lot of symbolism built into it. This is George Washington, who is called the father of our country, which is maybe an overstatement. There were many founding fathers, but we like these phrases. This is George Washington, who actually didn't say, "I cannot tell a lie, I chopped down that cherry tree." That story was invented by one of his biographers. This is also the George Washington who owned slaves, right? When there were, this is quite common in his era, but there were some who didn't. But nonetheless, this is a picture that is generally viewed as quite positive. George Washington, from what I understand from history, really had a very good reputation. There really wasn't scandal associated with him to any real degree. And here he is, fully adorned in his battle, his battle array, into his uniform, ready to give orders. He's got his left hand on a cannon, and if you really want to get people's attention, you can put your left hand on a cannon when you're talking to them, and they'll probably really pay attention to what you're saying. And he's also got his right hand in kind of a cocky way with his hat on, sort of like saying, you really can't defy me. His horse is in the background, ready to carry him to battle. So this is a picture we look at and we instantly identify with. And we also believe, I'm pretty sure, that there was a real person named George Washington, even though what we're looking at right now is just paint and line, right? The cannon is made of the same thing that George Washington is made of. It's just paint, right? But we don't usually see that. We really just look at the image, and that image connects to understandings we have in our mind, images, associations, a variety of things. And we say, that's George Washington, almost as if he were standing, around the corner. We could go up and talk to him. So that's sort of one kind of introduction to how we use what comes into our eyes, right, as sense data. What comes into our eyes is such. It's just what it is, right? But we add to it, we react to it, we do all sorts of things to it, and we do this unconsciously. Now I'm going to another Western image. So this is a very famous painting. It's called the Girl with a Pearl in Her Ear, right? Now, once again, from reading art historians, this picture is what's called a trony, T-R-O-N-I-E. That is the artist, Vermeer, another 16th century painter, made up this image. This was to be an ideal, kind of a very exotic figure. That's the idea about it. There was no model for this person. So you can't, now, of course, you look at it and then you react in a different way. You can find that the girl is attractive, interesting. You could postulate what she's looking at, what's going on in her mind. And someone actually wrote a novel called The Girl with the Pearl in Her Ear. But there's no way to verify it. Also, I read, and I find this a rather amazing fact, that the pearl in her ear, which is predominant, first of all, according to art historians, is bigger than any pearl that anyone would ever wear. I wouldn't catch that, but this is what I read. Also, evidently, it's 2 brush strokes of white paint, which just shows the astonishing skill of the painter. So that's, so there's another image, once again, just like seeing George Washington, we're just seeing form and color, nothing more, right? But the reaction on any number of levels, even to just the way that the painting has been executed, can be very different. Now, here's another image. This is a famous picture by Thomas Gainsborough, an English painter, 17th or 18th century. Anyway, so this is also, it's not known if there was a model to this. People speculate. There's no one speculates about the first picture, right? That was clear from the beginning. He made it up. Historians have tried to figure out who this young boy was, but in one sense, it doesn't matter. What matters is this attitude, the kind of elegance and assertiveness that you see in the picture. And once again, you can really admire the technique behind it. And you might feel things that are different from the previous picture. It's a boy, not a girl. He's standing, and the look and the attitude on his face seems to be very different. Even though the idea of an attitude, if you think about it, is something in our minds. There's no attitude there, right? There's no attitude that says self-assured, arrogant, or whatever you see. All of that is within us. So it's really kind of fascinating how we react to these things. So now I'm going to move. Now this is going to be a shock from moving from the 17th, 18th century, 16th, 17th, 18th century. Now I'm going into the 20th century. So here we have a picture by Pablo Picasso. Now, if you were walking down the street in Fifth Avenue and you saw someone walking to you look like that, the first thing you do is call 911 and an ambulance. And you just imagine what you would say to the dispatcher. I don't know, there's this woman, she's got a triangular head and it's all tipped over, and I don't know if she can swallow anything. Her neck is so small and I don't see any arms or legs. This is really frightening, right? So what's happening here, once again, just line and paint, just like what we encountered with the previous pictures. But now we don't have any reference points. None of us have friends or relatives that look like this, right? I'm pretty sure. So we can get certain impressions about the colors and the shapes and the juxtaposition of lines in the picture. We may have an emotion one way or another. We may feel some confusion. We may feel, people sometimes look at pictures like this and they feel aversion. I don't know what I'm looking at. This makes me uncomfortable. But it's just paint and line, right? And now here's another Picasso where this is more understandable. Once again, you would be very frightened if you actually saw someone who looked like this. But the lines on the face are, and the eyes and the juxtaposition, and just the configuration of the face with the hat and the hair, it does look like a person, but the person is distraught, and this shows the difference between showing and telling, because if you ever take a course in creative writing and you'd be told that showing is more powerful than telling in writing, and that would mean you have a passage you're writing about a person, a man or a woman who is sweating and pacing the floor and muttering to themselves and wringing their hands. And you wouldn't have to say they're distraught because you showed it. But telling might be better in a sense when you're in a relationship, because if you throw a plate at someone, well, they know you're angry, but you haven't really communicated with them, right? And I'm bringing this up because the Lotus Sutra is replete with all sorts of different nuanced kinds of ways of communicating, from direct statements like I just went over to images of the burning house, or the pyramid, the stupa rising into the air, and people performing miraculous events there, which once again communicates something to us in some ways. But here in this painting, we can really look deeply at it. And if you were to see the picture close up, her eyes are really plain, because this was presented to the people of Greece, and this is around the time of World War II. And this is about the fear of someone in a war zone, which unfortunately, is just so prevalent in today's world in so many places. And now this, how are we, what do we get from this? How are we moved by this painting? Well, it certainly can let us share in a certain grief, a certain understanding. It's not necessarily going to remove our vexations, right? This is not what these artists are about. These artists are interpreting the world, in ways that do make us see things differently, but it's not necessarily inviting us to look at our minds. And so here's the last Picasso, which I really like. This is a girl looking in a mirror. And it's very interesting from a Buddhist point of view, because a mirror is such an important image in Buddhism. It can be used as a symbol of vanity. You're looking at yourself and you say, I'm so wonderful. All my beautiful hair, I'm just absolutely gorgeous. Or it can be used to for self-reproach, for remorse, for really looking at your behavior, analyzing yourself, if you will. And also it can be used as a metaphor for what I spoke about before, of actually recognizing that you're in the midst of ultimate reality, but you yourself are preventing yourself from seeing it. But in this case, here's the real woman on the left, who once again has some physical problems, if it was a real woman, who's looking at her reflection in a mirror, which is perhaps even more distorted, has more darkness, more despair perhaps in it. And she's reaching her hand all across the mirror, sort of embracing her image, kind of narcissistic, kind of accepting, it's hard to say. Okay, so now this was obviously not an exhaustive course in Western art history, to say the least, but just to give us a little taste of how we might look at things when we're in the museum. Now I'm going to move to Buddhist iconography. And first I want to just a quick picture of, this is a statue of Avalokiteshvara. And I'm going to speak about Avalokiteshvara in much greater length in the next picture. But what I want to point out is that his leg, or her leg, depending on how you look at it, is off the cushion, or the lotus platform, and is in a position of royal ease. And that's understood to mean that the Bodhisattva, the great Mahasattva, is ready to act compassionately at every moment, incessantly, with no let up. It's also shows that the leg is not in an identifiable identifiable position. It's kind of, to me, it's a symbol of like breaking through all sorts of boundaries. It's not on the floor, it's not in a seated position. And it shows this great flexibility of compassion, the openness. So this, I just wanted to bring your attention, and it happens to be an absolute beautiful work of art, which is something we point out at the museum. So now here's the principal thing I'm going to talk about today. And I want to really, really change gears in looking at this picture, because even though this is paint and line, just like the other pictures, the purpose is very different. This is a picture, this is a tanka, a Tibetan painting, which is meant to be used for meditation, meditative absorption, and represent the highest kinds of mind states. This is red Avalokiteshvara. Red is the color of sunset. It is it's the final kind of wisdom, the final discriminating wisdom that we are heir to, and this is what Avalokiteshvara is showing us. And the now I'm not sure how clear these things, but I'll just narrate what's going on in the picture. Coming from his head is Amitabha, and Amitabha is the embodiment of discriminating awareness. And in order to be compassionate towards someone, you have to be able to see their situation, your situation, with absolute clarity. I mean, if you're a Mahasattva, we do our best, right? And the mantra for Avalokiteshvara is Om Mani Padme Hum. And that translates, or one way of translating it is, behold the jewel of wisdom unfolding in the lotus of compassion. So in this, guys, Avalokiteshvara is not simply the bodhisattva of compassion. This is merging of wisdom and compassion in this tanka. And what, as I go through it, you know, I want to point out there are there's a lot of information, a lot of subtlety in this. And I sort of don't want it to be like Easter eggs. You know, I watch Marvel movies with my son, and, you know, whether it's Spider-Man or, you know, WandaVision or whatever program it is, there are all these little references to other superheroes and whatever. And it kind of enriches your experience. It's kind of a way of collecting information. That's not what this is about. This is about recognizing mind states. And also, not that this wasn't the case with the Western pictures, but in this particular case, in looking at Avalokiteshvara, we can really understand this from a non-dualistic point of view. I mean, we are, in essence, looking at ourselves. Now, that might sound just like a metaphor, and I think it is in many ways, but you actually are looking at it right now. So it is part of your experience. There really is no separation between you and the painting, and what you can become aware of is not simply just how you react to it. And this is very natural that we would either like or not like it, or find some things pleasing in it or not. You can start to see how rich the imagery and the symbolism, not as symbolism to attach to, not symbolism for our fabricating minds, but the symbolism that points to our Buddha nature. So at the top of the painting, there is the Adi Buddha called Vajradhara. And the Vajradhara is considered to be a 6th of the 5 Buddha families, and actually so incorporating the 5 Buddha families. And I want to briefly go over what that means, because if you're not aware of this, it can really sound like it's coming from outer space. The 5 Buddha families are very important in Vajrayana, and what they are ultimate manifestations, ultimate transformations of, at baseline, the 5 skandhas. So every one of the 5 skandhas, which in the Pali text, right, it's stated that dukkha, suffering, is the 5 skandhas. Not just that they produce it; they are it. In the third type of suffering, besides, there's the suffering of suffering, like when a tiger is biting your foot, the suffering of impermanence, where you're holding on to things or pushing things away. And then there's the third deepest type, the all-pervasive suffering, the suffering of the 5 skandhas. That's what the 5 Buddha families represent. And so, and they represent the transcendence, the wisdom energy in all of these different obstructions. So if there's pride, which would be Ratnasambhava, his antidote is equanimity, seeing everything as equal. If it's desire with Amitabha, it's using discriminated witness to know about our attachments. So that's what's behind this. Now the deities surrounding it. Well, first of all, let me tell you, there are 2 Garudas, which are half bird, half other animal, which are in the upper right and left hand, which are representative of non-dualism, absolute non-dualism itself. And the top of a tanka is considered to be the lineage holder. This is the way that the teachings have come down to us. It's an authentication to show that the absolute truth, the way, for example, in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says, what I speak is true, right? So this is showing the truth, and the Heart Sutra, real and not false. That's symbolic, emblematic of the truth. And so the deities that are around Avalokiteshvara, there are many different views, but one is that they represent these 5 Buddha families, and there's a kind of mathematical way of, or a non-mathematical way of understanding this, which I'm not going to go into. Just take my word for it that these are the 5 Buddha families, which are being penetrated, being understood, and being assimilated by Avalokiteshvara. And also, so the actual the practice, if you will, is in the middle part of the tanka. That's where we do the meditation, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. And in the bottom are the Dharma protectors. Principally among them is Mahakala, and Mahakala is the wrathful manifestation of Avalokiteshvara. And the wrath is aimed at our obstructions, not at us. The wrath is aimed at the unreal. That is what Mahakala is all about. That's what it's not wrath in terms of hatred. It's terms of really determined energy. So I talked earlier about the practices of Samatha and Dhyana or Vipassana and Samapati. So you can see that there's an oval halo, an aureola around Avalokiteshvara. So one understanding is going up on the left side, that's Samatha. On the right side, coming down, is Vipassana. and inside is absolute emptiness, emptiness and wondrous existence. The halo around the head can be understood as unobstructed awareness. By the way, the deities that are around, also there are 16 of them, they represent the Eightfold Path, but in two different ways. I find this quite interesting. Now, I think we all know the Eightfold Path of right view, right intention, right livelihood, speech, action, effort, concentration, and samadhi, mindfulness. So that's, when we understand those and when we're starting out, those are part of the path. That's the outer Eightfold Path. The inner Eightfold Path is when you have fully assembled and ingested, assimilated, become one with the teaching, so that all 8 are present in you at every moment. This is the case with Avalokiteshvara and the great Mahasattva. It's not the case with most of us. What Avalokiteshvara is standing on, and notice Avalokiteshvara is here standing, so he's in a state of action right now. He's standing on, actually it's a 4-fold disc. It's hard to see the bottom. There are lotus flowers pointing downward. That's compassion towards the world. There are flowers pointing upward. That's compassion towards yourself. Very important. The little green line there, that's the moon disk, which is about the phases of the moon. And so that everything is changing. Practice keeps changing all the time. Yet he's standing on the sun disk, which is the disk of absolute enlightenment. The multicolored pants are symbols of the Nawari culture in Nepal, but they also represent innumerable meanings: absolute openness, awareness, non-obstruction, no preferences. And this is so now I want to talk about the meditation behind this. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, I have this written in the file, so I have to stop the sharing for 1 second and I will come back. Let me go to, how am I doing? Okay, I think I can finish up pretty soon. This is working out pretty well. All right, so I want to read from the Surangama Sutra, Avalokiteshvara's method of achieving enlightenment, discovering, attaining. So he says, and this is a short passage, but it's something to really contemplate. He said, I began with a practice based on the enlightened nature of hearing. First, I redirected my hearing inward in order to enter the current of the sages. Then external sounds disappeared. With the direction of my hearing reversed and with sounds stilled, both sounds and silence ceased to arise. So it was that, as I gradually progressed, what I heard and my awareness of what I heard came to an end. Even when that state of mind in which everything had come to an end disappeared, I did not rest. My awareness and the objects of my awareness were emptied. And when that process of emptying my awareness was wholly complete, then even that emptying and what had been emptied vanished. Coming into being and ceasing to be themselves ceased to be. Then the ultimate stillness was revealed. So that is, that's the utter depth of Avalokiteshvara's practice, which is really gone beyond the 5 skandhas, gone beyond the senses. And let me go back to the Zoom and come back to that again. Okay, you're going to hit this one, this one. Oh, am I here? Yes. Oh, no, I want to go back. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we're coming. All right. So the last two things I want to talk about in Avalokiteshvara are his hands. First, the right hand is in the symbol of generosity. And this is a continuing generosity, never interrupted, but it's also not only giving, but it's also receptive, I find. And that's why there are other statues of Avalokiteshvara with eyes in the hand, showing that the compassion is boundless, is not limited by physicality. And also it's calling on us to show our generation, kind of almost to hold hands with Avalokiteshvara. Now, in the left hand is the symbol of the lotus, which is, as everyone knows, shows the ability we have to live with our vexations, grow through them, and blossom into Buddhahood. That's the general understanding of the flower. But there's another teaching, which I don't think is very familiar in Chan circles, but it's called the meditation of 1,000-petal lotus. And in that meditation, and this is not necessarily for beginners, but I think it's very good to hear about this. You have a single focus object, let's say your breath. You're watching the breath go in, watching the breath go out. Now, normally when we start meditation, when your mind wanders, you recognize that your mind has wandered and you come back to the in and the out. But in the 1,000-petal, distractions are not considered distractions. They are part of the meditation. And so your mind is going out and coming back, going out and coming back, going out and coming back, almost as if you're defining the petals of a lotus. And what is also going on in this meditation is that you're seeing the patterns in your mind. You're beginning to understand your karmic proclivities. So distractions are not distractions. Everything is open in your awareness. So I just wanted to mention that. And also another way of understanding how we encounter the world is on 4 levels. We have the sensory, what we feel in our bodies and in our minds away, the emotional, which I have to explain, and the cognitive, how we think about things. But then there's a 4th level of karmic, which is our intentionality, which is really what we're looking to work on, right? So, and I just want to, I think I've got a little more time to then just dispense with everything I just said in a way. So I'm going to show this statue, which is quite interesting because this is in the Rubin Museum and it is labeled an unidentified spiritual master. So in this particular case, we don't know who this is. And this is like Linji's a man of no name and no rank. We have nothing to fall back on in terms of, oh, this was a great master who did this, had this many disciples, wrote this many works, was this influential. We don't have that. So now all this stuff that I talked about before, I've sort of taken away, and you're just left with beholding the statue of a great master who is doing the earth witness mudra, showing actually showing a moment perhaps of supreme enlightenment. The hand is in meditative is the absolute. The hand touching the ground is the relative. He's in perfect equipoise and is just something to behold, and perhaps something that would encourage us in our practice. Anyway, I've taken us through quite a bit today. I think Let me stop the share. All right, with 5 minutes to spare. All right, so worked out. I hope everyone was able to follow it. I mean, I know I covered a lot of territory. It was really about making the Lotus Sutra accessible and showing the depth in it in ways that we might not see because we could just be lost in the stories. So I just want to end with the liturgy. May the virtuous merits adorn and purify the pure land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the suffering of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind, exhausting the body of retribution. May we be reborn in the land of extreme bliss.